If you are unfamiliar with the magical ingredient that is brown butter, imagine normal butter in all its splendor and glory, but even nuttier, even more caramelized in flavor, and somehow even more buttery. Now, in theory, browning butter is an incredibly simple process that can be used to improve an infinite amount of recipes. But if you're not exactly sure what you're looking for, you run the risk of either not browning the butter at all and not really imparting much flavor, or even worse so, burning the butter completely. So let's break down this simple technique step by step.
Now, some recipes, like my brown butter and sage pasta sauce, will only require a small amount of brown butter. But for today's video, we're making a larger batch, as it's easier to brown and this stuff keeps in your fridge really long. It'll keep in there for all winter long, so it's ready to use for any sauce or cookie recipe at a moment's notice. Now, before we actually start cooking our brown butter, let's quickly explain some theory. Now, taking a closer look at our butter, we can see that it's mostly made up of fat with a small percentage of water emulsified into it, with an even smaller percentage of milk solids. Now, our first goal is to melt the butter completely by adding it to a pan set over high heat and heating it enough so that it starts to boil and the water content inside of the butter evaporates completely. Once the water is gone, you're left with fat and milk solids, and this is exactly what we need. You can tell visually that the water is gone and evaporated because the little bubbles become much smaller and almost frothier, and you can actually start to smell the browning happening in the air. If you ever wanted to know how to make clarified butter, all you need to do is strain off the solids at this point before they start browning, and you're left with a really amazing versatile cooking fat. But we are looking for so much more here. And for brown butter, we are looking to basically fry off the remaining milk solids in all of that butter fat. And as they brown, they become more roasted and sweet and caramelized in flavor. At this point, I like to keep things moving with a whisk to make sure my solids are not getting stuck to the bottom of the pan and burning. To monitor this, I like to clear off some of the froth from the top by either moving my utensil or blowing gently on the pan to see the bottom of it. That's also a reason why I would recommend using a stainless steel pan rather than a Teflon non-stick, just because it's much easier to see color when your pan isn't a dark black or charcoal color. Ultimately, your goal here is to brown the solids as much as possible without them becoming burnt and bitter. Now, you've probably heard Australians refer to brown butter as burnt butter, but that's just semantics. You are not actually looking to burn the butter. It tastes awful. Once the air smells like sugar cookies and your butter looks brown and beautiful, you can take things off the heat. If you're fearful of things burning, I would immediately transfer your brown butter to another container. But if you think you can squeeze out a little bit more browning and a little bit more flavor, I would recommend leaving the butter in the pot and letting the residual heat continue to allow the flavor to develop and brown. This is what we used to do in the Michelin star restaurants that I worked in, and it makes all of the difference. If you want to slow down the heating ever so slightly, you can do what I did and lay down a damp kitchen towel just to remove some of the heat from the outside of the pan. I left this to sit for about 15 minutes, and optionally, if you'd like, you can also add other flavors. So things like sage or rosemary if you want a savory brown butter, or things like cinnamon and cardamom and cloves if you want like a sweeter infused brown butter. But I want this to be as versatile as possible, so I am adding none of that. Once your butter is cool enough to store, I like to add it to a nicely cleaned jar, and very important to be sure to add all of the milk solids from the bottom of the pan. These have an immense amount of brown butter flavor, so if you're using this butter for making a cookie or a sauce or something like that, you definitely want to include some of these with every use. If you want to see this incredible ingredient used in a recipe, you can go check out my recipe for a brown butter and sage tortellini using the video over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
This is the fat that we've browned. This is the water that's evaporated. And this is the solid which infuses with color. Mind this.